The critical question is what drives us into action. Hi, I'm Sharon Salzberg. I am a meditation teacher. I've been teaching meditation for over 45 years now.
I'm Jud Brewer. I'm an addiction psychiatrist and a neuroscientist, professor at Brown University, and also the chief medical officer at Sharecare.
Where are we making our decisions from? Our choices? What is the intention? Do we have kind of a North Star for our lives that sort of guide us in values and making choices? Or are we just sort of bound to what arises strongly in the moment, and we take a look at all of that as well. And it seems to be that when those thought patterns go unexamined, we kind of go along with a lot of conditioning. I just had a recently published book, which is my 12th book. It's called Real Life. Working on the book, it sort of reinforced my understanding that many of these habits, many of these patterns were picked up for many of us at a much younger age when survival really was in question because we were children. And so some of them made a tremendous amount of sense at the time, like go numb, something like that, cut off your feelings. And so here too, we can allow everything the dignity of its own being. Maybe it was very smart, a long time ago, but you sort of don't want it as your chronic go-to place anymore. There are other options. We're adults now, we have skills, we can learn skills. We can learn ways of being, and we're not so kind of alone in that quest for some kind of balance in some way. And so that's a part of it too, is seeing, there are lots of ways, especially when they're strong enough to drive us into action, that it's like we just don't need to do that anymore. We can be happier right now.
Mm-hmm. You're reminding me of a story that somebody told me from his own, somebody that had a traumatic childhood, and he, as most children who experience trauma, had no control over that experience. He was a child, and he said that the only thing that he did have control over was worrying, where it felt like a mechanism that was helping to protect him, or at least do something. It felt like he was doing something. And he was now in his 60s when he described this. And said, now, and he'd come to our unwinding anxiety program because he had this chronic worry, and was realizing, I think as you're describing, it was like this pair of shoes that didn't fit anymore, and they felt like they fit and helped him from getting calluses on his feet or whatever, to probably extend that analogy too much. And now these shoes, he was realizing, ouch, these shoes actually don't fit. And so my sense is, that's what you're helping people to do, is to recognize shoes that might have made a lot of sense or seem like they fit at a time. They can just bring some fresh awareness in, a fresh perspective, bring in growth mindset, say, and start to ask these questions like, do these shoes actually fit? Do I need to be wearing them? Is it helpful to find a different pair of shoes? How do we move from constriction to expansion?
I think it's a multi-step process, and I think which step we do when also depends on what interests us or inspires us or seems like challenging in a good way. So one part of it is what we've mainly been talking about. It's being able to approach the constricting elements in our life with more balance, more awareness, more kindness toward ourselves, more compassion. And that in itself, like that holding environment or that way of relating, will release a lot and be transforming. And that's a little hard to believe, but it's an experiment, and you check it out, So there's a whole range of practices that we can employ that just sort of remind us. I mean, here's one simple one, that I often talk about that's fun, where we say, like, if you have a really nagging inner critic, like not a helpful voice, but really kind of nasty, or at least putting you down a lot, you can recognize it, give it a name, or give it a persona, give it a wardrobe. So, because everything is going to depend on how you relate to that so-called being. So I named my inner critic Lucy, with apologies to any Lucys who are listening, based on the character in the Peanuts comic strip. Someone had left a cartoon on the desk of the Peanuts comic strip, and in the first frame, Lucy is talking to Charlie Brown, and she says, "Oh, Charlie Brown, you know what your problem is? The problem with you is that you're you. Then in the second frame, poor Charlie Brown says, well, what in the world can I do about that? Then in the third and final frame, Lucy says, I don't pretend to be able to give advice. I merely point out the problem. So I named my inner critic Lucy. And then I had the experience really of mindfulness, you could say, because everything is going to be, how do I relate to Lucy when she appears? So something really great happened for me right after I'd seen the cartoon. And my very first thought was, it's never going to happen again. My response to it was, hi, Lucy. And my favorite form of that was, chill out, Lucy. Just chill. Just chill. It's different than, you're right, Lucy. You're always right. And it's also different than, I cannot believe I've been meditating all this time and I've spent all this money on therapy and Lucy's still here. You know, I'm such a failure. It's very different. We call mindfulness sometimes the place in the middle. It's like, hi, Lucy, have a seat, you know, have a cup of tea, just chill. Not going to let you take over. And yet I don't have to be so freaked out about your appearance. And that's the skill we practice again and again. So that's one whole part of it, is how to deal with those constricting things. And the other part is reaching for a sense of possibility. Like, what's it like to cultivate loving kindness, to cultivate compassion, to practice gratitude, to practice generosity? Because we can, and it is like an experiment. Like, what happens when I look at that clerk in the supermarket instead of through them? What happens when I wish myself well instead of going through the litany of my failures one more time? You know, and it's just this whole landscape of experimentation.
Well, I love that. And it's making me remember some of the very common Charlie Brown strips where Lucy, you know, is like, hey, Charlie Brown, come kick the football, right? Let's have, you know, I'm going to help you out here. I'm going to hold the football for you. And then, of course, we all know what happens. She pulls it out of the way and he falls on his butt. And it happens every time. She's never like, oh, whoops, I caused that to happen. So I could see acknowledging Lucy and not giving Lucy the power over us to kind of control our lives and then laugh at us or judge us or whatever Lucy does after she pulls the football away from us to, you know, to kind of rule our lives. So I love your description of that. And I could see that the acknowledgement and then bringing kindness in. So I could see us getting in a fight with Lucy. Like, why'd you do that to me? That's so mean. And then Lucy, it gives Lucy power because she's like, oh, he's paying attention. She's paying attention to me. Oh, you know, well, let's try that. And then, you know, it engages Lucy. But you're describing, if I'm hearing this correctly, you're describing something really different, which is to acknowledge Lucy, you know, chill out. You know, it's like, so that Lucy can, you know, yell or scream or do whatever she wants, but we're not necessarily giving her that energy. Am I on the right track there?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. And that way there's some space there. And in that space, we can consider, what do I want to do? Or, you know, what choice might I make now? You know, even a choice that's different. It's like my favorite definition of mindfulness for years was based on this article in the New York Times years ago about one of the very, very early pilot programs bringing mindfulness into the classroom. So this was a 4th grade classroom in Oakland, California. The journalist asked one of the kids who, you know, he's in 4th grade, let's say he's 9 or 10 years old. He asked him, what is mindfulness? And the kid replied by saying, mindfulness means not hitting someone in the mouth. That's mindfulness. And I thought that is a great definition, because what does it imply? It implies knowing you're feeling angry when you're starting to feel angry, not after you've sent the email, you know, not after you've lashed out at your kids. It's like as it's starting to build, because you're that in touch. But it also implies a certain balanced relationship to the anger, because if you're overcome by all of these changing feelings, you're likely to hit a lot of people in the mouth, because life can be really challenging. And on the other hand, if you're freaked out, if you're so upset, you're so ashamed of what you're feeling, and you want to push it down, you want to deny it, you want to hide it, you get tighter and tighter and tighter until you explode. So it's not going to work in the end. We say again, mindfulness is a place in the middle where you can be with what's happening fully and yet not engulfed in it or pushing it away. And it's a training, it's a process. You know, it takes time, but it actually can be a very effective training. And I like to think of that kid, you know, the 9-year-old kid in the space that's created by being mindful of his feeling, thinking, hit someone in the mouth last week, didn't work out that well. Maybe I'll try this. So it can lead to kind of more creative action, more interesting choices.
So anything else that you would add in terms of how we can just feel more expanses every day?
I think it is an everyday question, and it doesn't, even though I've been emphasizing the journey and it takes time, I think there are things we see immediately. It's just in that moment when we pay attention to somebody, when we think to thank somebody, when we can laugh at ourselves, because we were so reluctant to thank that person, thinking I can never pay them back or whatever. I would set out, in addition to whatever kind of discipline like meditation you may be undertaking, I would set out to do one thing a day, like thank somebody, or remember to breathe before a meeting, or look at every face on Zoom, and instead of being in a hurry, or why do they have a better bookcase than I do, kind of like just look at them and think, may you be happy, or may you have a good day, or may you be peaceful, and see what happens the whole time, paying attention to your own feelings and reactions.
I love it. So more bite-sized wisdom from Sharon Salzberg. So I'd encourage everyone to go out and check out Sharon's book, Real Life. And Sharon, thank you so much for this conversation. It was delightful.
Thank you. I am truly inspired by your work and your ability to express it in a site like this, which is great.